Meanwhile, former presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama appear to be skirting the tradition of not speaking out against their successors. Margaret Brennan reports.
Bigotry seems emboldened. Our politics seems more vulnerable to conspiracy theories and outright fabrication.
Today, the 43rd president made no mention of the 45th, but his focus was clear.
We've seen our discourse degraded by casual cruelty. At times, it can seem like the forces pulling us apart are stronger than the forces binding us together.
He suggested that an America First mindset is distorting our democracy.
We've seen nationalism distorted into nativism. We've forgotten the dynamism that immigration has always brought to America.
There was no specific reference to President Trump's mantra.
That was fake news.
But President Bush pointedly called on journalists to uphold their integrity for the sake of the republic.
Our democracy needs a media that is transparent, accurate, and fair.
A similar call to arms was made by another senior Republican earlier this week, Senator John McCain.
For the sake of some half-baked, spurious nationalism cooked up by people who would rather find scapegoats than solve problems.
Today, former President Barack Obama also spoke out.
The world counts on America having its act together.
Appearing at a Democratic rally in New Jersey, he urged young voters to fight back.
We are rejecting a politics of division. We are rejecting a politics of fear. That we are embracing a politics that says everybody counts.
President Bush said he believes the American spirit will ultimately prevail.
The American spirit does not say we shall manage or we shall make the best of it. It says we shall overcome. And that is exactly what we're going to do.
It is an unwritten rule for presidents not to criticize their successors. But, Rena, this may be another example where these standard rules no longer apply.
Yeah, Margaret, that code of silence from former presidents has always stood. So I'm kind of curious as to why do you think it is that he chose to speak out about this today?
Well, the president, whether current or former, typically knows the weight of the office and the weight of the words he speaks and chooses the opportunities carefully. President Bush certainly has not spoken out on a regular basis, has not been engaged at political rallies for a variety of reasons. So when he does speak, as he did at his own forum today, along with a number of officials who served with him at the time, he was listened to, because this certainly did sound like he was issuing a wake-up call to America. This wasn't just about President Trump. This was the criticism of the discourse writ large right now. And it really did seem, when you read through that speech and hear him there, that he's appealing to the soul of the country, reminding us of what the institutions are supposed to be and how they are supposed to be actually upheld. Really a warning there.
It was so interesting to hear him say this, because he was so quiet under the Obama administration.
Yes.
But do you think that these types of remarks are playing into President Trump's entire premise of being a Washington outsider?
Perhaps. I will say that former President Bush's spokespeople deny that this was in any way an assault or an attack on the current president, saying a lot of these are themes that the president has spoken about in the past. And that is true if you look at how President Bush spoke out in the wake of 9/11 against anti-Muslim sentiment, saying and parsing the differences here and pushing back on some of the nativist sentiment that he pointed to today, saying there's a difference between being patriotic and nationalistic and being nativist. Those are themes he's spoken about in the past. But it is no mistaking who he was referring to in terms of the discourse in Trump's America. Not blaming President Trump for causing that, but certainly pointing to him and the level of discourse as a symptom of what he seems to be describing here. I will say, I mean, we can't forget history and forget that there are tough elections each and every time President Bush ran them, and certainly President Obama and the man who he beat, Senator John McCain, were also speaking out here. And there were some tough and some very questionable things that came up in those political mudslinging fights of an election year. But it seems inarguable at this point to say that 2016 wasn't in some way a turning point to the downside in the level of political discourse these days. As General Kelly was talking about today, the chief of staff, he feels that there are many things that are simply no longer sacred.
Yeah, and as we saw in your piece, Margaret, Senator John McCain also spoke out this week against what he called spurious nationalism across the globe. The president has a pretty ambitious legislative agenda. Is he now alienating fellow Republicans with this kind of talk?
Well, you are seeing a pitched fight within the Republican Party, one that began back in 2010, but has taken and become even more factionalized in many ways since 2016. And Senator John McCain does not mince his words and has said he has no fear taking on the president when it comes to some of these things that he has raised and has phrased as being really threatening to the values of American democracy. But he's also raised issues where he said, look, if the president takes a turn towards these legislative items that we want to get done and work on, he's willing to do it. But in many ways, Senator McCain, he is often described as the lion of the Senate these days. Yeah. And given his health battles, he's not leaving anything on the field. He's leaving it all on the field, I should say, not leaving anything undone. He's really not mincing words and making it clear. But I should say those remarks, he was very much talking about America, but he was also pointing to his concerns about what else is happening around the world in terms of protectionist sentiment in Europe, protectionist sentiment that he sees as very worrisome. Just the other day, he said he looks around and it sounds like the 1930s when you listen to the way some people talk.
Margaret Brennan at the White House. Margaret, thank you.